the external border of the tuberosity of the ischium and is inserted into the upper part of the linea quadrata, that is, the line which extends vertically downward from the intertrochanteric crest. A bursa is often found between the front of this muscle and the lesser trochanter, sometimes absent. The obturator externus is a flat, triangular muscle which covers the outer surface of the anterior wall of the pelvis. It arises from the margin of bone immediately around the medial side of the obturator foramen, viz., from the rami of the pubis and the inferior ramus of the ischium. It also arises from the medial two-thirds of the outer surface of the obturator membrane and from the tendinous arch which completes the canal for the passage of the obturator vessels and nerves. The fibers springing from the pubic arch extend on to the inner surface of the bone, where they obtain a narrow origin between the margin of the foramen and the attachment of the obturator membrane. The fibers converge and pass backward, lateralward, and upward, and end in a tendon which runs across the back of the neck of the femur and lower part of the capsule of the hip joint and is inserted into the trochanteric fossa of the femur. The obturator vessels lie between the muscle and the obturator membrane. The anterior branch of the obturator nerve reaches the thigh by passing in front of the muscle, and the posterior branch by piercing it. Nerves. The gluteus maximus is supplied by the fifth lumbar and first and second sacral nerves through the inferior gluteal nerve, the gluteus medius and minimus, and the tensor fasciae lati by the fourth and fifth lumbar and first sacral nerves through the superior gluteal. The piriformis is supplied by the first and second sacral nerves, the gemellus inferior and quadratus femoris by the last lumbar and first sacral nerves, the gemellus superior and obturator internus by the first, second, and third sacral nerves, and the obturator externus by the third and fourth lumbar nerves through the obturator. Actions. When the gluteus maximus takes its fixed point from the pelvis, it extends the femur and brings the bent thigh into a line with the body. Taking its fixed point from below, it acts upon the pelvis, supporting it and the trunk upon the head of the femur. This is especially obvious in standing on one leg. Its most powerful action is to cause the body to regain the erect position after stooping, by drawing the pelvis backward, being assisted in this action by the biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus. The gluteus maximus is a tensor of the fascia lata, and by its connection with the iliotibial band steadies the femur on the articular surfaces of the tibia during standing, when the extensor muscles are relaxed. The lower part of the muscle also acts as an adductor and external rotator of the limb. The gluteus medius and minimus abduct the thigh when the limb is extended and are principally called into action in supporting the body on one limb, in conjunction with the tensor fasciae lati. Their anterior fibers, by drawing the greater trochanter forward, rotate the thigh inward, in which action they are also assisted by the tensor fasciae lati. The tensor fasciae lati is a tensor of the fascia lata. Continuing its action, the oblique direction of its fibers enables it to abduct the thigh and to rotate it inward. In the erect posture, acting from below, it will serve to steady the pelvis upon the head of the femur, and by means of the iliotibial band it steadies the condyles of the femur on the articular surfaces of the tibia, and assists the gluteus maximus in supporting the knee in the extended position. The remaining muscles are powerful external rotators of the thigh. In the sitting posture, when the thigh is flexed upon the pelvis, their action as rotators ceases, and they become abductors, with the exception of the obturator externus, which still rotates the femur outward. 4. The posterior femoral muscles, hamstring muscles, biceps femoris, semitendinosus, semimembranosus. The biceps femoris, biceps, is situated on the posterior and lateral aspect of the thigh. It has two heads of origin. One, the long head, arises from the lower and inner impression on the back part of the tuberosity of the ischium by a tendon common to it and the semitendinosus, and from the lower part of the sacrotuberous ligament. The other, the short head, arises from the lateral lip of the linea aspera, between the adductor magnus and vastus lateralis, extending up almost as high as the insertion of the gluteus maximus, from the lateral prolongation of the linea aspera to within 5 centimeters of the lateral condyle, and from the lateral intermuscular septum. The fibers of the long head form a fusiform belly, which passes obliquely downward and lateralward across the sciatic nerve to end in an aponeurosis which covers the posterior surface of the muscle and receives the fibers of the short head. This aponeurosis becomes gradually contracted into a tendon, which is inserted into the lateral side of the head of the fibula, and by a small slip into the lateral condyle of the tibia. At its insertion, the tendon divides into two portions, which embrace the fibular collateral ligament of the knee joint. From the posterior border of the tendon, a thin expansion is given off to the fascia of the leg. The tendon of insertion of this muscle forms the lateral hamstring. The common peroneal nerve descends along its medial border. Variations. The short head may be absent. Additional heads may arise from the ischial tuberosity, the linea aspera, the medial supracondylar ridge of the femur, or from various other parts. A slip may pass to the gastrocnemius. The semitendinosus, remarkable for the great length of its tendon of insertion, is situated at the posterior and medial aspect of the thigh. It arises from the lower and medial impression on the tuberosity of the ischium by a tendon common to it and the long head of the biceps femoris. It also arises from an aponeurosis which connects the adjacent surfaces of the two muscles to the extent of about 7.5 centimeters from their origin. The muscle is fusiform and ends a little below the middle of the thigh in a long, round tendon, which lies along the medial side of the popliteal fossa. It then curves around the medial condyle of the tibia and passes over the tibial collateral ligament of the knee joint, from which it is separated by a bursa, and is inserted into the upper part of the medial surface of the body of the tibia, nearly as far forward as its anterior crest. At its insertion, it gives off from its lower border a prolongation to the deep fascia of the leg, and lies behind the tendon of the sartorius, and below that of the gracilis, to which it is united. A tendinous intersection is usually observed about the middle of the muscle. The semimembranosus, so called from its membranous tendon of origin, is situated at the back and medial side of the thigh. It arises by a thick tendon from the upper and outer impression on the tuberosity of the ischium, above and lateral to the biceps femoris and semitendinosus. The tendon of origin expands into an aponeurosis, which covers the upper part of the anterior surface of the muscle. From this aponeurosis muscular fibers arise and converge to another aponeurosis which covers the lower part of the posterior surface of the muscle and contracts into the tendon of insertion. It is inserted mainly into the horizontal groove on the posterior medial aspect of the medial condyle of the tibia. The tendon of insertion gives off certain fibrous expansions. One, of considerable size, passes upward and lateralward to be inserted into the back part of the lateral condyle of the femur, forming part of the oblique popliteal ligament of the knee joint. A second is continued downward to the fascia which covers the popliteus muscle, while a few fibers join the tibial collateral ligament of the joint and the fascia of the leg. The muscle overlaps the upper part of the popliteal vessels. Variations. It may be reduced or absent, or double, arising mainly from the sacrotuberous ligament and giving a slip to the femur or adductor magnus. The tendons of insertion of the two preceding muscles form the medial hamstrings. Nerves. The muscles of this region are supplied by the fourth and fifth lumbar and the first, second, and third sacral nerves. The nerve to the short head of the biceps femoris is derived from the common peroneal. The other muscles are supplied through the tibial nerve. Actions. The hamstring muscles flex the leg upon the thigh. When the knee is semi-flexed, the biceps femoris, in consequence of its oblique direction, rotates the leg slightly outward, and the semitendinosus, and to a slight extent the semimembranosus, rotate the leg inward, assisting the popliteus. Taking their fixed point from below, these muscles serve to support the pelvis upon the head of the femur, and to draw the trunk directly backward, as in raising it from the stooping position or in feats of strength, when the body is thrown backward in the form of an arch. As already indicated, complete flexion of the hip cannot be effected unless the knee joint is also flexed, on account of the shortness of the hamstring muscles. End of section 51. Recording by Selena Arter.